Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Other news, the Conservative Party has been accused of significant failings and fined £70,000 for not properly declaring election spending. An Electoral Commission investigation found the party hadn't accurately reported more than £250,000 that was spent on campaigning for the 2015 general election and 3 by-elections in 2014. Our correspondent Darren McCaffrey caught up with the Conservative Party chair, Patrick McLaughlin, a little earlier.
Mr. McLaughlin, I'm Darren from Sky News. Can I just ask you about...
Thank you.
Excuse me, why am I not allowed to ask you any questions? Can I just ask you about the £70,000 worth of expenses that the Conservative Party are going to have to pay back? Pretty serious allegations, along with the other allegations in Thanet South. Why are you not willing to comment, Mr. McLaughlin? You're the current chairman of the Conservative Party, aren't you?
We've made the statement. Thank you.
In regards to these police allegations, though, 12 forces have now reported...
We have made a statement.
Is the Conservative Party going to pay the money back?
We've made the statement.
Darren joining us now live from Westminster. Didn't want to talk to you, did he?
No, he really didn't. And I actually have to say, Kay, I was slightly taken aback by, the rather normally affable chairman of the Conservative Party, Patrick McLaughlin, trying to grab my phone or take it out of my hands. I think it is a sign of the pressure that the Conservative chairman is under at the moment. Of course, he was not chairman back at the last election, but he has having to deal with the consequences of it. In a pretty damning report from the Electoral Commission today, with that record fine of £70,000, accusing the Conservative Party of failing to correctly report all expenditure during the 2015 campaign, particularly in relation to that national battle bus that travelled to those marginal seats that ultimately, of course, remember, helped David Cameron secure that overall majority for the Conservative Party. And also, in a more serious matter, has referred a possible criminal offence, that of Simon Day, who at the time was the Conservative Treasurer, for knowingly or recklessly making a false declaration. And that's been referred to the Metropolitan Police. Now, we've spoken to the Prime Minister today, Theresa May, and she's insistent that the Conservatives have cooperated with these investigations.
We have complied fully with the Electoral Commission throughout their investigations. They have imposed a fine on the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party will be meeting that fine, will be paying that fine. In fact, there are some issues that the party itself raised with the Electoral Commission through their investigations.
Now, that's not what the Electoral Commission say. They say on page 10 of the report, actually, the Conservative Party did not cooperate. They, in fact, hindered and caused delay to the investigation. But there is pressure at CCHQ and, indeed, Downing Street with this Electoral Commission report, these potential Crown Prosecution Service looking into 12 other cases and potentially the prospect of by-elections. So maybe not a surprise, Kay, that Patrick McLaughlin wasn't terribly keen to talk today.
Thank you.
The Conservative Party has been fined a record £70,000 for breaking spending rules during the 2015 general election and 3 by-elections in 2014. The Electoral Commission said there had been significant failures in the reporting of expenses and that there was a realistic prospect the money had given the party an advantage. 12 police forces have now asked the Crown Prosecution Service to consider criminal charges. The Conservative Party insists any failures were due to administrative error. Daniel Sanford reports.
So let's get out there, let's go campaign for Craig.
The South Thanet constituency in 2015, where the Conservatives were battling Nigel Farage, desperate to stop him winning a seat.
Is there any chance of counting on your support?
They poured big names and resources into it, but now they've been given the biggest ever fine, £70,000, for breaking the rules on recording election spending, here and elsewhere.
We've never issued findings to that extent before, and I think they are some of the worst in the fact that they were unable to provide evidence when we needed it, and the reports were inaccurate, and the spending returns did not contain things that they should have done.
18,800.
The Tory candidate, Craig McKinley, won the seat. His official expenses after the campaign showed that he was within the local spending limit. But the party's spending in the area is now under question.
The Conservative Party spent thousands of pounds on hotels here in South Thanet, £15,000 in a single hotel on the hill here in Ramsgate. And the Electoral Commission says that at least some of that money should have been included in the local candidates' election expenses.
They brought down busloads.
One of the local UKIP leading lights told me they always felt the Conservative Party had cheated.
Just the sheer number of bodies, the sheer number of full-time staff that were down here, the sheer number of buses that were running, bringing in volunteers at weekends, who were all fed and watered and had money spent on them or whatever.
I'm on the bus. I'm on the bus.
The Conservative Party also had battle buses of activists touring other marginal seats. Again, the Electoral Commission says that some costs should have been put on local candidates' expenses, possibly pushing them over spending limits. So far, 12 police forces have sent files to the Crown Prosecution Service. Kent Police is not one of them. Then there was money missed off the Tories' national expenses altogether, more than £3,800 for hotel rooms in Margate, over £63,000 of spending on the battle bus tours, and almost £105,000 of other spending.
We have complied fully with the Electoral Commission throughout their investigations. They have imposed a fine on the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party will be meeting that fine, will be paying that fine.
If there are criminal prosecutions, they could lead to by-elections in constituencies like South Thanet. Recently, Labour and the Liberal Democrats have also been fined for illegal expenses returns. The Electoral Commission is worried that parties are starting to see the fines as a cost of doing business, rather than a way of keeping British elections fair. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, Ramsgate.
So, plenty going on today in the political world. As well as all that, we've had a record fine for the Conservative Party over election spending and a straight refusal from the Scottish Secretary to grant a second independence referendum to Nicola Sturgeon. Let's talk to former Conservative advisor and PR consultant Alex Dean. Anne McElvoy will be joining us from The Economist very shortly. But first, let's bring in Alex, should we? Hello to you, Alex. Goodness, this is a bit of a mess for the Tories, isn't it?
I don't think anyone would say that getting fined by the Electoral Commission is good. But on the other hand, I mean, there's a reason that people don't make party political hay over this, Kate, and it's that it happens to all of us, I'm afraid. Nobody goes into politics, I think, with ill intent in mind, and whilst it's become fashionable to say politics is not a game, nor is it a game, nor is it an enterprise filled with fraud either. And this seems to me to have been some honest mistakes, yes, bad that they happened, but the sort of thing that's happened to Labour with the Edstone and other declarations, and to the Liberal Democrats. Not a great day for the Conservative Party, but nothing deliberate, and done the right thing, held their hands up, admitted that it was wrong, paid the fine, and time to move on.
To be fair, it's not up to us to decide whether it's a mistake or whether it's fraudulent. That's for the CPS to decide, isn't it?
Well, that's a separate set of questions, of course. You're right. There are some investigations pending with the CPS. The Electoral Commission's proceedings are entirely separate from that, and that's what you asked me about the fine. As far as the proceedings with the police are concerned, horrible news, both for the electors in the constituencies that are affected, also for the members of Parliament who've been investigated for many months now, have not been proceeded against by the Crown Prosecution Service, will never receive an apology or a suggestion they didn't do anything wrong, and whose names will remain impugned in the public mind with this news that they were investigated and now have not been proceeded against, the bit that nobody notices. The other thing I'll say, Kay, is this, that it looks like there are several members of Parliament that are still being investigated by our Crown Prosecution Service. I bet you that several of them never get proceeded against for anything, but nevertheless, in the public eye, they will still have had this smear against their name for the rest of their time in Parliament. That's not fair on them or on their electors. But I know it's just how it works, but it's a very unfortunate aspect of our political system.
Anne McElvoy with us now. Hi, Anne. Mistakes happen. These slurs are not fair, and mistakes don't necessarily mean fraud.
Well, I think that's overdoing the pathos somewhat. This whole situation arose because the election spending was badly managed, and it, as often happens, and it's certainly true that it has happened to other parties, but this is the biggest fine that we've seen, that it happens to their advantage. And then to come along and complain that people are being dragged through the mud because they're being investigated when something was badly wrong and needed to be investigating seems to me to be a hypocrisy of a quite high order here. I'm sure that in the end some people who are being investigated will have found to have done nothing wrong, and perfectly correct that they should see that their names have been cleared. But let's be clear, something has gone badly wrong here, and some people are going to have to take the rap for it.
Alex Dean?
Well, I think that allegation of hypocrisy was being directed at me, and I think that's a tad unfair. I mean, the Conservative Party that I know, for which I have worked, admittedly I wasn't working for the party at the last election, but the notion that the people that I know and the systems that I have seen there were working towards some kind of calculated outcome for the Conservative Party, manipulating the system, is one I just don't accept. And it's part of what I think, no offence intended to our media class, neither to Sky nor to Anne, but it's so easy to be cynical about politics, and it's so easy to suggest that something like this has happened deliberately or in a designed way. We have very low spending limits in British politics. It is easy to fall foul of them, as every party has done. I don't make party political hay out of them when that happened to the Labour Party. Well, as I was going to say, I don't make party political hay out of it or call people in the Labour Party hypocritical. It's just part of what happens. It's unfortunate, but I wouldn't go around saying it's being cynical about it either.
And do go on.
For heaven. This is hokum of a very high order. Look, I understand that parties, when this sort of thing happens, always find a reason why it was an innocent mistake. It may well have been an innocent mistake, but it's quite a major mistake to the advantage of parties fighting in marginal seats. What we have to remember is whether or not it's hypocrisy or whether or not your other guest likes the media class or he doesn't, there will be calls to look again at some of these results. It is going to be a series of tripwires for Theresa May, who frankly has more than enough on her plate at the moment, and it is, I'm afraid, going to damage the reputation of many of those who managed this situation as we ran up to the last general election under David Cameron. I don't think one can get away with just saying this is very unfortunate. It's unfortunate because something was very badly done and has unravelled, and it has taken the party quite a long time to get round to facing up to that. I certainly don't think the other parties are exempt from a lot of those charges, but right now this is the party we're talking about, and a little more frankness wouldn't go amiss.
Well, let Alex Dean, who was the former Chief of Staff for David Cameron, come back on that.
Well, the individuals who were the candidates in this campaign, as far as I'm aware, followed the guidance they received from the party, within their members, which had taken legal advice to say they were doing the right thing, and or weren't doing the wrong thing. And certainly to say that they should be investigated or might be presumed guilty to a criminal standard, it seems to me several jumps too far. I presume good faith in these things, in the same way I presume good faith about the other parties that are concerned, and that's why I wasn't particularly saying you were being cynical, Anne. I was saying the way that people are approaching this whole question, it adds yet another layer to the cynicism we feel about people who go into politics, who generally work very hard, generally thanklessly, and certainly if they're people operating at party headquarters rather than the candidates who actually get some glory sometimes if they win, the people who tend to work in party headquarters can only ever get stuck with things and can only ever get blame. It's those people I feel for today, because knowing them as I do, the people who go into that sort of work are palpably decent. Do mistakes happen? Absolutely. So should they be investigated? Sometimes, of course. But should we presume the worst of people?
But just not as much as this time, it would appear.
Okay, let Anne come back in on that, Anne.
Well, come on. I mean, you sound like you're really just taking this as a very bare minimum of responsibility, and I think it does cry out for more than that. It's the whole question of the battle bus. This is not really a question of a small slip in reporting, which, as you rightly say, these errors have occurred and other parties have made them, but this is of a reasonably high order, and either it was incompetence or it was done for advantage. It is perfectly reasonable to ask those questions.
Well, it would be a remarkable environment, and perhaps it's the case at your newspaper, but it would be a remarkable environment if nobody ever made a mistake, wouldn't it?
Yes, but what on earth has that got to do with what is going on now? It sounds like the biggest deflection from something that the party needs to look at very, very seriously indeed, and I'm quite sure that Theresa May will want rid of this as soon as possible. You feel now lots of people are saying they're quite happy for this to go ahead. They are quite happy to go along and cooperate with it. That was not the position, as I understand it, for a lot of the last few months. So I think we have to be, a bit careful about sounding too glib about it.
Alex?
Well, I'd certainly, if one of us was glib, I don't think it was me. But I would think about one thing, at least we agree, and that's that the leadership of the Conservative Party will want this issue to be behind it. The trouble is, of course, when you get to criminal investigation period, these things don't happen in days or even weeks. This will be with us for some time to come. I think that's a great shame, actually, for politics as a whole. And I think that, especially when you bear in mind the fact that the number of members of Parliament, as reported, is a larger number than the Conservative majority in the House, whilst I don't imagine by-elections will result in many, if any, seats, and I imagine in the current climate the Conservative Party would hang on to any seats that were recontested. It's still a very bad day for politics, and I concede, of course, a bad day for the Conservative
Would it not
Party.
be better if someone who'd been in a senior position were to take responsibility and say this was a major mistake, it happened on my watch, and perhaps you can all decide between you who you think that should be? But I think at the moment that sense that it's all very unfortunate and simply passing the buck around isn't quite getting the mood right. And I think that is the opposite of cynicism. I think if one wants to elevate politics, then all the parties have got to do these basics better. Otherwise, voter trust just goes out of the window long before you've actually got round to governing or doing the difficult stuff, which I genuinely do respect the political class for.
So, Alex, it might be unfortunate, but somebody has to take the blame.
Oh, in my experience in politics, there is no shortage of people willing to take responsibility, especially amongst the professional political operatives. Perhaps slightly less these days amongst ministers. Yes, I am. Perhaps a little less sometimes amongst ministers and cabinet secretaries who tend not to resign for things that happen on their watch anymore across the parties. But I've seen both in the Labour Party and in the Conservative Party people willing to hold their hands up and say that something went wrong in the course of a campaign.
So who should it be on this occasion? Well, can we know who you think it might be on this occasion?
No, I don't know, because I wasn't working at the Conservative Party headquarters at the time. But I do think the salivation over the prospect of having your next victim, or the idea that in the absence of having been presented a neat whipping boy for you to have a go at, it's very wrong with the parties not to have done that for you. Is a bit.
Sorry,
much.
I will come back on that, because that's just. I think that's a really, to use the word unfortunate. It is not salivating to simply want parties to do this process as well as they should. And although many people will understand where there are slips, this is quite a considerable one. It's been very embarrassing. It's been very drawn out. The process has been drawn out and should have been admitted to and dealt with much earlier. Now, if you call that salivating, well, then reporting is really what this is all about, isn't it? It's honest reporting of how you spent money to win an election, and whoever was in power, I would be taking the same. I would be taking the same stance.
No. It wasn't honest reporting. You were demanding your sacrificial victim and complaining that because one hadn't been neatly presented to you, the parties weren't doing a good enough job.
I was asking you who you thought it should be.
The Conservative Party wasn't offering up for you. And I said, I don't know who ultimately will take responsibility for what's happened within the Conservative Party. I'm not working for it presently, and I wasn't working for it at the time that these incidents took place. But I just think our media now love to nothing more than sticking the boot into somebody. And that was what I was saying about this culture of cynicism, which, yes, seems like you're a part, and this culture of singling out an individual and castigating them. I mean, as I say, I presume good faith in politics, not just in the Conservative Party, but across the political parties. And I think most people go into politics because they want to do better for their community and better for their country. I for one, admire that, and I find the preference for the latter and the preference for singling people out to have a go at rather lamentable.
Well, it sounds a little bit like Donald Trump to me. It must be the media's fault. There it goes.
Ladies and gentlemen, we must leave it there. Fascinating, as always. Do come back and talk to us again
Kate.
soon. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot.
The Conservative Party repeatedly broke the law by failing to properly declare its election expenses during the last general election. That's the categorical and damning finding of a year-long investigation by the Electoral Commission, the official body charged with regulating political parties and elections. It follows a long-running investigation by Channel 4 News, which uncovered hundreds of thousands of pounds of improperly declared spending by the Conservative Party in 3 by-elections in 2014 and in the 2015 general election. Today, Theresa May went on television to insist we have complied fully with the Commission's inquiries. However, on page 10 of this report, the Commission notes the party did not cooperate fully. The Crown Prosecution Service is now examining evidence gathered by 12 police forces across the country, covering dozens of sitting MPs. Michael Crick has this.
Lasting more than 12 months, this inquiry into Conservative election spending is the biggest the Electoral Commission has ever mounted. An inquiry prompted directly by investigations broadcast by this programme in the early part of last year.
Today, the Commission delivered its verdict, and it's damning. It finds in the clearest terms possible that the Conservatives broke election law by failing properly to declare their election expenses. They've been given a record fine, and the report also finds that the former Treasurer and Chief Executive broke the law on multiple occasions. He may also have committed a criminal offence by knowingly or recklessly making a false declaration. And it's been referred to the Metropolitan Police.
The fine levied by the Electoral Commission was £70,000, hardly likely to bankrupt the party.
£70,000 isn't much for the Conservative Party. I mean, they spent more than that on 2 hotels in the Rochester by-election.
No. I mean, it is something that we are concerned about, and it's something that we have now repeatedly called for, because that £70,000 is made up of a number of fines, and in fact the maximum single fine we can impose is just £20,000. And we think that big parties or those campaigning in big elections may well just see that as a cost of doing business.
This isn't business though, it's democracy. And the story began with 3 big by-elections in 2014, where UKIP hoped to get its first MPs. In Clacton, Rochester and earlier Newark, where I actually raised expenses with the winning Tory MP.
The Liberal Democrats estimates you spent £250,000.
Well, look, I've no idea where that came from. I'm certain the party stayed within the legal limits.
Last year, we obtained bills showing that across those 3 by-elections, the Tories spent more than £80,000 for staff to stay in hotels.
The Commission is satisfied,
they say,
that the entire accommodation costs for staff and volunteers were incurred to facilitate those individuals' work on the respective by-election campaigns.
So they say most of those costs should have been included on the candidates' local spending returns. But that might well have put them over the legal spending limit. Then, after the general election in South Thanet, we spotted the Tories had declared as a cost for their national campaign £14,000 for party bigwigs at the Royal Harbour Hotel in Ramsgate.
McKinley, the Conservative Party candidate.
In the seat, where the Tory candidate Craig McKinley hoped to stop UKIP leader Nigel Farage becoming an MP.
Mr. Timothy, my name's Michael Crick. I'm from...
The Electoral Commission examined the role of 2 political advisers staying at the hotel. Nick Timothy, now Theresa May's Joint Chief of Staff, whom I encountered a couple of weeks back, and another of May's closest advisers in number 10, Stephen Parkinson. The Commission disagree with the Tory claim that Timothy and several of his colleagues were at the hotel working solely on the party's national campaign.
2 political advisers based in the Royal Harbour Hotel,
the report says,
in fact played key roles in determining Mr McKinley's campaign messages and in drafting campaign material promoting Mr McKinley's electoral success.
Some of those people who were staying in that hotel were clearly working directly on the local candidate's campaign and contributing to that, and those elements of their work should have been attributed to the local candidate's spending return, yes.
So the hotel room for Nick Timothy and Stephen Parkinson, big advisers now to the Prime Minister, those should have been on Craig McKinley's campaign spending returns. And well, they weren't cheap, those rooms either.
I'm not
£100 a night or so.
I'm not commenting on the individuals involved, but certainly accommodation costs that were put into the national spending return, where the people were working on the local candidate's campaign, we would have expected to see in that local candidate spending return, yes.
Similarly with the battle bus tours in the closing days of the 2015 campaign, ferrying scores of activists around marginal seats with rooms overnight in hotels, all at huge cost. While the Commission hasn't found evidence to suggest the battle bus project was intended to promote the election of individual candidates, they do say a proportion of the £100,000 plus battle bus costs should also have been included on local candidates' spending returns, as they clearly benefited from the tours. The Conservatives have always said they'd cooperate with the Electoral Commission.
He's legged it. He's walked off the other way. He said, come on.
Here's what we were told last year by Lord Feldman, the then co-chairman who helped centralise the party and is now partly blamed by some of the MPs under investigation.
We will, of course, do everything we can to cooperate with them and give them all the information that they need.
And today we heard much the same from Theresa May.
We have complied fully with the Electoral Commission throughout their investigations. They have imposed a fine on the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party will be meeting that fine, will be paying that fine.
Complied fully? The Commission accused the party of unreasonable, uncooperative conduct. They say they had to apply for a High Court order at one point to force the Conservatives to produce the evidence they'd requested.
When we first asked for information, if we had had that and they had been able to provide it then, we probably would have been able to progress a lot more quickly and it would have been easier for everyone.
And you also say this involved extra expense to the public purse.
Well, those delays meant that we had to deploy more staff, we had to use our teams to in the notices and then to seek the court order. So yes, that does incur cost to the public purse.
The Conservatives said again today that local candidates correctly declared all their spending in 2015. The Electoral Commission have strongly suggested that's not true. And a dozen or more MPs face the possibility of being disqualified, as the Crown Prosecution Service has about 10 weeks to consider police findings on the matter.
And Michael Crick is with me now. Michael, what next?
Well, the Conservative Party is still under huge pressure on this issue. That was illustrated today when a Sky reporter, Darren McCaffrey, came across the Conservative chairman, Patrick McLaughlin, and tried to ask him questions and film it on his iPhone. And Mr. McLaughlin tried to grab his iPhone away from him and refused to answer any questions. The essential upshot of today's report is the Electoral Commission think and say that in South Thanet and in the battle bus constituencies, the 24 or so of them, the local spending returns were under-declared. Now, that is serious stuff. And of course, that is what the police have been looking at. We heard yesterday how police forces in a dozen places have now sent files of evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service. Now, a lot of those files of evidence won't just be about one MP, but two, or in one or two cases, perhaps three MPs. And we're also still awaiting news from what's happening in about 4 other police forces. Cheshire said today that they didn't think any criminal offences had occurred in the 2 constituencies they were looking at. The Crown Prosecution Service now has about 10 weeks to decide when to prosecute. There is a time limit on this, and I imagine we will hear about that sometime around about the beginning of sometime in May.
Michael Crick, thank you. To the eye of the storm now, the place thought most likely to face a by-election as a result of the expenses investigations is South Thanet, where the Tories went all out during the 2015 general election to deny UKIP leader Nigel Farage a seat in Parliament. Craig McKinley, the man who did win South Thanet for the Conservatives, has been questioned under caution by Kent Police over whether he correctly declared all the money spent on re-electing him. Porrick O'Brien has been trying to grab a word.
A whistle-stop coastal tour to assess the fallout of the election expenses investigation in some of the places where it matters most. First stop, Chatham in Kent, where Craig McKinley MP lives. He was interviewed by police last week.
Is Craig in? It's Channel 4 News here.
He did not want to be interviewed by us.
Could I have a quick chat with him?
The Conservative MP beat UKIP's big gun, Nigel Farage, last year to win in the neighbouring constituency of South Thanet, a campaign at the centre of the Electoral Commission's report today. Perhaps it was just chance, but for those on the waterfront we met, this is about something far bigger than administrative minutiae.
If we've got a democracy and the rules are laid down, you've got to abide by the rules, haven't you? And if you don't, you're cheating. That's it.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what it is. Cheating's cheating, and they were.
Does it matter to you?
Well, it does, partly because the election was so close. So, you know, there could be an allegation, I guess, that someone had an unfair advantage because they weren't playing by the rules.
Craig McKinley has stuck to the line that people sent here by Conservative HQ were part of the national campaign and not working under his campaign umbrella. The Electoral Commission report, though, talks about correspondence that paints a different picture. For example, people like Marion Little parachuted in. In other correspondence, the report goes on, McKinley refers to her as the campaign coordinator. And in still further correspondence, she, this senior advisor sent down by Conservative HQ, advises a volunteer, and I quote, "We are running Craig's campaign." The fines imposed by the Electoral Commission relate to national spending returns. Important to stress that the Conservatives reiterated today that local agents correctly declared local spending.
I said, as this campaign went on, that if I didn't win, I would stand down as leader of UKIP.
So next up, this piece of coast just outside Margate, where famously Nigel Farage gave his resignation speech after the last general election. And word has just come through today that UKIP are opening the process by which they nominate a candidate in case of a snap general election or a by-election here. We've organised to meet one of the people that'll be throwing his hat into the ring. Are you tempted?
Tempted? I think so. I think probably local candidates will do very well down here. We certainly, even allowing for the fact of what happened to the general election when Nigel was cheated out of his seat, you know, we won the district council anyway. So
Is
we've
that
got
how
a
you
good
see it,
side
cheated
record.
out of his seat?
I don't think there's much doubt about it now, is there?
And that is how UKIP support base here feel, cheated, but also acknowledgement that the next stage is crucial.
It's up to the police to find out whether it was done
That's it.
deliberate
It's
or
got
not,
to be
isn't it?
found out and
If
proven.
it's definitely deliberate, definitely another
Yes.
election.
For the people we met, at least, a sense that this latest episode just further erodes faith in politics.
Porrick O'Brien in Thanet South. Well, I'm joined now by Gavin Miller QC. He's an expert in election law, and from Cardiff I'll be joined in a moment by John Strafford, who is the chairman of the Campaign for Conservative Democracy. Gavin Miller, CPS now have at least 12 police authorities reports on, we don't know how many candidates, but at least 12, probably more. What will they be doing?
Well, they'll be looking at what the police have been able to tell them by way of evidence about what services were provided in those constituencies to the candidates, what the people did, what the candidates knew about it, what they discussed with the Conservative Party nationally about what that meant in terms of their own expenses, and how credibly they can claim not to have appreciated that there would be an election expense for them to declare in relation to their local campaigning.
Well, now, a number of these MPs actually met with the Conservative authorities during the week and complained that they had been told that these battle buses and all the rest of it would be dealt with on the national budget. They would only have to pay for the literature. Is that a defence?
No, it's not a defence, not a complete... Look, the law has always put the onus on the candidate and the agent to put in an accurate return and to be honest about their belief that it's an accurate return. It's a fundamental of our system that the local candidate and agent does that. It's a worrying state of affairs if you could simply avoid any potential liability by saying, well, the local party told me this. You've got to exercise your own judgment.
The sums of money are enormous. I mean, tens of thousands of pounds for hotel rooms, for all sorts of, for the battle buses themselves and the rest of it. I mean, £15,000 doesn't go very far. It must be pretty obvious to a judge where the truth lies.
Well, it should be pretty obvious to a candidate and agent. If you get 50 people turning up on an expensive bus, having been put up overnight, to do leafleting and canvassing in your constituency that day, at least you've got to ask yourself, what about the cost of all this?
Well, now, the important thing is that the last case you actually had to handle as a lawyer which was that of the MP who was accused of doing the same thing and in fact had her seat taken away from her, but was not jailed.
Yes, that's right.
And so jail is not inevitable for these MPs.
No, the judge in that case took the view that losing the seat publicly
was a bad enough
embarrassed like that was a bad enough punishment on its own.
Well, now, Mr. Stafford, can we talk to you now? Because you are an activist. You're somebody who does all that envelope stuffing and you sort of run this democracy idea inside the party. How do you view what has happened?
Well, in the words of Laura and Hardy, it's another fine mess. It's quite appalling that we've got into this situation. I feel very sympathetic to the candidates who are involved in all this, because my experience is that once central office moves into a constituency, they effectively take control, and the candidates really don't have a great deal of say in the matter. And the problem is that within the Conservative Party, there's no democratic accountability. So that those people that ought to be checking these items out, like the party chairman, the party treasurer, they're appointed people. They're not elected by the members. They're not accountable to the members. And that means that they don't have to turn up at an annual general meeting and present a report and be questioned on their activities. And that goes to the heart of the problem.
Isn't also the heart of the problem that these campaigns have become very, very national, that basically it's a very centralised party with, in some constituencies, really remarkably few members to fight an election?
Well, it's become centralised because the number of members that the Conservative Party has got and the other parties has diminished so rapidly. From 3.2 million in 1951, we're down to not much more than 100,000. You cannot run a ground campaign with that number of members because only about 10% of them are active. You know, if you were trying to run a national campaign with 10,000 members, you wouldn't even be able to man all the polling stations, let alone get people out to vote.
But one thing,
until something is done about improving the membership.
Yeah, but
Sorry,
one thing you'll know, Mr. Stafford, is that they're very good at raising money, particularly from the city and elsewhere. They've got a lot of money, and the question has to be asked in the end: have they simply bought themselves victory?
Well, money's bedeviled politics for a very long time. And it's time that we all brought in a cap on donations of about £5,000. And if we did that, well, then the parties would have to depend on look to their members to get their support in a ground campaign. It's because of all this money flushing around the system that they're able to spend large sums of money on what often are just wasteful things.
Mr. Stafford, thank you. Just a final thought from you, Gavin Miller. Is this a big enough shock to the system to get a decently empowered electoral commission that can really... They've complained they can't find these people any more than they have, and they complain they can't investigate as much as they'd like to?
It is, and what we should have is representatives in the key seats of the Electoral Commission, like local police officers or enforcement officers during the election, to see who's there, who's doing what, how much it's costing, so that that's all known about when the return is filed. So if it looks wrong to the people who know.
Gavin Miller, QC, thank you very much indeed. Back to our main report. The record £70,000 fine handed out to the Tory party for improperly declaring election expenses may have landed during Theresa May's premiership, but the actions that provoked it happened on David Cameron's watch. Well, while we've been on air, the former Prime Minister has been speaking at the London School of Economics. Jackie Long is there. Jackie.
Well, with British politics in some turmoil, tonight the former Prime Minister David Cameron is at LSE talking about international politics, and he's been focusing a lot, we're told, on the rule of law. Now, he is taking questions from the media. We're very much hoping to hear what he has to say about today's Electoral Commission report, which we'll try to bring to you if we can. This, of course, is all about life after number 10 for Mr. Cameron. Lectures, after-dinner speeches, charity work, and he's writing his memoirs, and he will not be short of material. The Prime Minister who gambled on a referendum and lost, the Prime Minister who triggered taking Britain out of the EU, and as we heard earlier in the programme, potentially the breakup of the United Kingdom. All of this and now this damning report from the Electoral Commission. Because while Theresa May has been left to respond to it, all of this happened when David Cameron was in charge. A new leader of the Tory party, determined to seize control. David Cameron always promised he would transform the Conservatives, but ended up accused by many grassroots supporters of driving a coach and horses through the old ways of doing things. But what part did his leadership play in leading the party into the current mess? Conservative commentator Peter Oborne.
It's all about David Cameron and very much about the way he chose to run the Conservative Party. He appointed as chairman Andrew Feldman, Lord Feldman, had no credentials for the job of any kind beyond having, as far as I can tell, played tennis with the future Prime Minister at Brasenose College, Oxford. Feldman was a businessman. Many of the most distinguished figures the Tory party has ever had, Chris Patten, Lord Butler, they've been Tory party chairman. Feldman ran it rather as a get-rich-quick merchant. You know, he's out there to achieve results, or at any rate, he tolerated that culture.
And Andrew Feldman's role became increasingly important as the focus on fundraising shifted to big donors. The party machine became increasingly centralised, the power seeping away from the local activists. But who was he accountable to?
Lord Feldman never, ever came out and spoke and gave interviews. The only interview I know of that he gave was the remarkable interview to Michael Crick, who pursued him round a whole office block.
Lord Feldman, did you break the law in spending all that money on those elections? In Thanet South and in the by-elections?
No,
Were you breaking the law?
We did everything in accordance with the rules.
And that was also the view taken by the then Prime Minister as the investigation into election expenses gathered pace last year.
I know you're proud of the work that you've done. We're answering all the questions. I think you're making quite a large mountain out of what I think is a relatively
So you disagree with the judge then?
No, I think it's a relatively straightforward set of questions that we have to answer. I'm very confident we're going to answer all of them and put this issue comfortably away.
After leaving Downing Street, like all Prime Ministers, the question of David Cameron's legacy looms. He's yet to speak about today's Electoral Commission report, but it's safe to assume he'd rather the battle bus expenses scandal could be left out of his. Well, as I said, David Cameron has been taking questions from the media this evening, and our reporter Ed Hauker tried to ask him a question about today's Electoral Commission report into Conservative election expenses.
Mr. Cameron, I'm from Channel 4 News. We're live on air at the moment.
We'll come back.
Well, no, we're live on air. We're about to go off air. I just have a very quick question.
Okay, I will come back to you, but we've got an event here. We're taking questions from the audience and from the press. So let's take a couple more from the audience, then we'll come back to the press. Lady here.
We will be off air by that point, sir.
So David Cameron there saying he's taking questions from the audience and the press. Wouldn't at that stage take a question from our reporter, but he will attempt to ask it again. That is it from us at the moment, though.
Jackie Long at the London School of Economics. Michael Crick still with me. Michael, well, where does this take us? I mean, there's going to be change, isn't there?
Well, I think in the long term, there's general agreement amongst all parties in politics that the rules have to be clarified. There has to be a lot more clarity about what counts as an election expense, what's a national expense, what's a local candidate expense, and how you apportion between the two if there's any dispute. Having said that, there are, of course, those people in politics, party organisers, who actually over the years have thrived on the lack of clarity, and they've used the lack of clarity to get down the rules. The other thing that needs to be sorted out is whose job is it to police all of this? Now, at the moment, it's very confusing. The Electoral Commission, the people who reported today, their area of responsibility is officially purely the national spending. The local spending limits in each constituency, they are still officially policed by the police forces. Now, policemen are not great experts, if you don't mind me saying, in election law.
Well, now, you've been covering these things for 30 years. I mean, it's not only the Conservatives, is it?
No, I remember back in the 80s having dinner with Eleanor Goodman, once of this parish, and a Liberal agent in Chesterfield, and him telling us all about the tricks that the party, Liberal agents, used to use to get round expenses. And in those days, it was the Liberals and their allies, the Social Democrats, who were always transgressing. In the 90s, I think it was New Labour flush with funds under Tony Blair, used to
run all sorts of by-election campaigns, spend extraordinary amounts of money. Nowadays, I think it's more the Conservatives, because they haven't, as John Strafford was saying, got that many activists, but they have got lots of money.
Michael Crick, quite a milestone in our electoral history, but that's Channel 4 News.